Alright, so this week I figured we might as well talk about the action movies that were brought to us not only by Luc Besson, who wrote them or co-wrote them, but David Bell also, who was the guy that, to my understanding, basically coined the term for parkour and kind of is like the founder of it, or considered to be such. And stars in the movies as well. And this is actually also goes back to 2014 when one of Paul Walker's last movies, Brick Mansions, came out, which was about 10 years after District B13, which it is actually like pretty much a remake of, which I'm sure most everybody knows. I am kind of embarrassed to say that when Brick Mansions came out, despite the fact that the first one had been around for like a decade, I was not really aware of these movies back then, so I don't even remember what the hell I said in that review, but so yeah, it's raining really hard like all day, so hopefully that doesn't pick up too much, but that's what that is. So I figure we can go ahead and go into these. Starting with the first one, of course, District B13 or District 13, whatever you want to call it. And the director is Pierre Morel, who did Taken, among many other things. And as I said, it's co-written by Luc Besson. His co-writer, interestingly enough, I believe is the guy that plays Ta, the gang leader. So, going on that, obviously we do have the setup where it's the district is, there's walls surrounding it, and they're completely taken away from society. A setup that has basically become more or less commonplace, seemingly, in futuristic set movies since this movie. So you can see kind of, this is one of those movies where you can watch and you can definitely see throughout the time since it's been released what movies it's probably had an inspiration for, even if those movies don't flat out come out and say that. And yeah, this is one of those movies that kind of, it immediately starts with kind of one of those ticking time bomb situations when there, obviously we have our, I guess, for a while he feels like the main antagonist, but he's more or less just a lackey, but it's K2, who we know this because one of the first shots we get of him is K2 shaved into the back of his head. And I actually really love this character. He's the kind of guy to where we see him, and in this situation I'm talking about with like this ticking time bomb of a scene as we're playing beat the clock more or less as he's trying to, Lato's trying to get rid of the drugs and all that. And he's just like killing dudes left and right, and it's like, even though he's kind of a lackey in this sense, and he kind of also somewhat has that appearance, this guy could legitimately be, like, in another movie, this guy could be, like, believably the main antagonist, especially with this opening scene. And I really love that that's kind of our opening. We just immediately are thrust into it, and we do the whole playing the beat the clock game and all that before all hell breaks loose, which of course it does when that, you know, proverbial timer goes off. And yes, that is when we start seeing the big action scenes really start to take place kind of immediately, and the parkour being shown to us. I actually had to parkour is one of those things that, like, I know when I see it, but I know it when I see it, but I wasn't quite able to put a definition to what exactly it was. So if you'll forgive me, I really didn't want to fuck this up, so I had to look it up. But this says that parkour is a training discipline using movement developed from military obstacle course training. Practitioners aim to get from one point to another in a complex environment without assistive equipment and in the fastest, most efficient way possible. Parkour includes running, climbing, swinging, vaulting, jumping, rolling, quadruple movement, and other movements as deemed most suitable for the situation. Parkour's development for military training gives it some aspects of a non-combative martial art. Makes sense, put into that context. And obviously, the main part to really take away from that is without assistive equipment. Because this is one of those movies where we were really kind of, you know, taking off in this action movie place to where effects were taking over almost entirely. To where you kind of started coming to grips with the fact that if you were going to go see a big action movie with big action scenes like this, 9 times out of 10 you're probably looking at something totally fake. So they decided to take this approach to this movie and show this stuff off. And yeah, there's like no CGI, there's like no wire work whatsoever. Anything and everything is exactly as we see it. And that is like the big, huge selling point for this movie and for movies like it. Because it's ready to give you that quality that we're not seeing anymore, and we still kind of, they're slowly trying to kind of get it back. This almost seems like it's kind of one of the starting points for the, let's kind of get back to the whole practical effects thing and show the stuff we can really do. We still don't quite see it enough, but this movie was definitely one of the ones that people look back on and say, it should be more like that. And that's not all, not just the practical stuff, but also the way the story is told. Because once this scene takes off, I was talking about this opening scene where all hell breaks loose, we see, once again, K2 being very much kind of hands-on when he's forced to come up with a solution immediately to the fact that Leto has gotten away from them. So he comes up with the idea of, okay, we'll just kidnap his sister, that'll bring him out. And this would normally be like a whole portion of the movie, when they like kidnap the sister and then they contact him, he learns it, he gets all mad and he seeks revenge and all that, and he comes blasting or whatever looking for her. But the way it goes is he says, you know what, we'll kidnap his sister, that'll bring him out. Very next scene, kidnapping the sister, it takes like 10 seconds. They just walk in, they grab her, and there's like this whole weird thing where like bystanders are like watching this happen, but it's like just because this is the environment that it's in, this is the world that it's in, it's just like this is just another occurrence. So it's like they just watch it happen, and then they take her back, and then they've got her, but then it's like, oh, well, he's really gonna come out of hiding now. But instead of the whole other thing I talked about, no, he just literally just drops out of the sky as soon as this has happened, just busts through a window, lands on the ground, and it's almost like, it's like we're watching a movie and fast forward, is exactly what it is. And this is just the opening, this is like the first 15 minutes, if that. And then like, just as we're kind of getting settled in, and it's like, okay, this is what we got. 6-month time jump. After everything has just gone as wrong as it possibly could. When we've taken the villain to the police station thinking that's going to sort everything out. And then that's where our starting point is when it feels like we've already watched an entire movie and fast forward. And then that's about a half an hour in, we're finally introduced to the other main character, this undercover cop, which, and this is one of those cases where it's like, there is a whole scene devoted to this. There's like a whole introduction to new people, there's a whole setup for an action scene, then there's a big whole action scene, a big whole shootout and all that. And this whole thing, which would be like the centerpiece action scene in another movie, like a lesser movie, its only purpose, pretty much, is to serve as an intro for this guy. Other than that, kind of useless, but still serves its purpose because it introduces us to this guy. And it's like, well, first off, it's kind of like, well, whoever they were when they got busted, they had it coming, because even if you like walk into this movie never having seen it before, you see him and you see Damien the first time and you immediately think, that is totally a dude in a disguise, a really shitty disguise. So it's like, those criminals had whatever came to them, they had it coming. But then also, it is kind of also an interesting way to show, it's not entirely pointless, because it does show that he really like went undercover with these dudes, convincing or not as that disguise may have been. But the thing is that it actually sets up the whole, he's kind of thrown off his game a little bit when he's thrown into this scenario with Leto, because he goes through the whole thing of like, I prepare for this stuff for like months, and these dudes are saying, do it right now. Like that thing you built up for months in that last thing, you have to just jump straight forward to that right now. And that kind of sets up where his character is throughout the rest of the movie, so it does help in that kind of roundabout way. And he does have some really good scenes also, like as nonstop as the movie is, it knows when it's, I still hardly call it downtime, because they still are able to kind of fit the stuff they need to in, while it still feels like the movie's constantly moving. At the hour and 24 minutes is all it is. But there is that really good moment where he kind of explains why he just doesn't let, like, 2 million lowlifes die. Because that is a question that's maybe kind of looming over your head in this whole thing, to where it's like, in the movies like this, they tend to have plots that you kind of have to overlook any, like, you know, holes or silliness in them, because that's not really the point. The point is the grand spectacle that is the action scenes. They just kind of have to be pieced together by these little plot threads, just enough to make sense. But no, they actually do go through the trouble of giving this guy a motive, even though he might seem so distant from having a motive, more or less, to save everybody. And that's when it gets very interesting when we get to our climax, because even though we do have a villain or two that may go in unexpected directions in one way or the other, really the climax of this movie is the two heroes beating the shit out of each other for the same cause, which is really interesting and really unique, because they both think by fighting the other they're stopping the bomb from going off, coming from two different directions, and that's just kind of an ingenious setup that we're able to kind of get it that way. It may seem maybe a tad contrived a little bit, but still, kind of like with him just believing so easily, oh, it's just a coincidence that it just happens to be the name of the district or whatever. But no, still, it is a very interesting setup and really gives it an interesting, unexpected kind of climax, when it just seems to be this movie that kind of, more or less, like I said, without too much concern for a particular, you know, really going into the story. Certainly there's a story here, but they don't really need to go into it because, you know, the action is the show. But the fact that they were able to kind of add in just little kind of curves like that, it really does mean something for the overall product. And so yeah, overall it does really stand as like it feels like one of the starting points for this kind of increasingly growing genre that is the non-stop action movie that we're seeing with like the Raid movies and with like stuff like Mad Max or something like that. We're seeing more and more of these action movies that really try to just go for the balls to the wall from beginning to end sort of thing, and I feel like this movie was one of the kind of the points that people really look back on, and like when they start an action movie they see this and they say like, I want to do something like that, something in that same style or feel or whatever, that just feels like the beginning of the movie is a bullet being fired and the rest of the movie is being on that bullet that's just not stopping anytime soon, for as far and long as it needs to go, before a big explosive climax. So yeah, it is also worth noting that there is, these particular DVDs are like, the French audio track is on there, but their default setting is the dubbed version. And it's usually, there are some dubbed versions of other movies out there that are fine, like they're tolerable. This is not the best dubbing job, so you'll definitely, like if you have these DVDs, you'll want to switch on over to the French audio. Once again, not that it matters too much because the action is so prominent, but well, and in Ultimatum you may want to, Ultimatum is a bit more story-driven, or tries to be a bit more story-driven, but so yeah, that's what I do anyway. But now let's just go right on over to District 13 Ultimatum. This is, of course, naturally, it's 3 years after the fact, despite the fact that we've gone longer in actual time between the releases of the movies. I think there was like, 5 years between movies, 2004 and 2009, I want to say. I'm not completely positive on that, but I think that's what it is. So yeah, it's coming out just before, this movie was released like just before the actual year setting when the first movie began. And we have Luc Besson writing again, solely this time. But we have a new director who is a bit flashier, which you may have thought would be impossible, but it's not. It's a bit of a flashier job here, but it obviously being a sequel to a movie like this, with a new director, he's going to try to basically make his own name, and it's going to be, well, it's a sequel, so we got to go bigger, we got to go more outlandish. And that's not necessarily just the action. Like, it could be when I was talking about one of the big scenes in the first movie is Damien's introduction to show him as the undercover cop that he is and all that. But I was talking about his lame disguise. So I guess we're going to go more outlandish because it's a sequel, so now he's in drag. So there's that. So it's like, it's not just the action, they tried to make a bit more outlandish than it was in the first movie. But as you can tell, where I'm kind of going with this is, in their attempts to make it bigger and flashier and all that, there is a really good chance that there might be large portions of it that feel significantly more fake than the first movie, to where it relied like solely on the, you know, no CGI, no wire work and all that, everything is real and all that. And that stuff certainly still is in this movie, but there are also some aspects where it feels like it tries to go a little bigger and it doesn't feel near as real, and you can kind of tell that they are cheating a lot more in this one than they are in the first movie. At least that's what it appears to be. Because they are going for, I mean, yes, this is a movie where, like, you have a car that drives through a building, through its hallways, then out of window, and then just casually drives away. They are trying to do more than just the kind of simpler, kind of combat-style scenes. And despite the fact that I just said that parkour is described as a non-combative martial art, you still fully get that feel of that yeah, but the thing here is that it all just feels like it's trying a little too much to be a little too bigger, and it's kind of losing that charm that this one brought on. And not entirely. There is, like, as I was saying, it's heavier on plot, it's heavier on commentary, but the thing is that all of that sort of has kind of an emptiness to it. To where, like I was saying, like, it's okay if the story is, like, paper thin because it's just piecing together what we're all here for anyway. But that's kind of the problem where this one becomes much more heavier reliant on that. To where it's like, it's okay if you want to, you know, add more story to it and try to make it a bit more, you know, add more to just the action scenes. But it would have to be more quality than this sets up, in regards to storytelling. But yeah, we do still have some great stuff in here. This is actually, there are quite a few scenes in this movie where Damien gets to shine in kind of a way he wasn't able to he wasn't as much of a focus in the first movie. There's like there's the great scene where he has like two cops one locked in each leg, as he tries to figure out what he's doing and contact other people. But there's also one particular action scene that works really well, where it's he's kind of doing a Jackie Chan thing, where it's obviously it's been done a lot, but I immediately think of Jackie Chan when the whole when there's like this really expensive piece of art that he's trying to keep in contact as he's fighting everybody off and keeping it safe at the same time. It's a very Jackie Chan kind of move, but the scene still does work. And there is that one particular moment that may not have worked in another movie, but I kind of appreciate here. And that's when he seems to grab a dude by the leg and then, like, jump off of something and then pulls the guy through a table after pulling him entirely midair and landing on his feet as he throws the guy through the table. And the reason I feel like this scene wouldn't work in another movie is the fact that we see it twice. Like, they basically do it, and then they basically say, here it is in an instant replay, and show it in slow-mo. It's exactly what they do. But it's actually well done to the point that I like the fact that we saw it the way we did first, and then they say, here's a better angle of it, and here's, like, the point of impact. Because, maybe I appreciate this because recently I watched Hard Target, the John Woo movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme. And despite being a John Woo movie, the action scenes in that movie are ridiculous and quite boring, because almost every single movement is, like, in slow-mo. And there's just no impact to any of it whatsoever. There's a lot of cutting, too. And it's like, I understand where slow-mo can work in this particular scene where we've already seen the whole thing play out. And then they just kind of say, but here's the really good stuff you couldn't get from that other angle. And you kind of get the best of both worlds. Whereas movies like Hard Target just seeing the point of impact in slow-mo, just by themselves with, like, no other context in this fight, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work at all, so, yeah. And yeah, this movie does have, like, more cutting in it, in its action scenes than the first movie does, which, once again, don't quite make it not near as strong in that department. And there's also another kind of downside where, you can probably see it in just the various ways it's so obviously trying to go bigger than the first movie, but there's one scene in particular that really stands out with this, and that is, I've forgotten her name now, but, the girl with, like, the blade in her hair, how she has that fight scene by herself where all the people are coming at her and she's, you know, fucking them up or whatever. During this scene that I kind of realized that one of the big problems this movie has that was missing in the other one is that it's trying to be really badass. The first movie is badass effortlessly. Like, you can't see anybody pulling any strings. That movie just does what it's gonna do, and you just watch it and you go, holy shit, this is badass. And there's a scene or two, particularly this fight scene with her in Ultimatum, where you kind of think, they really want us to think this is badass. They're really, really trying for that. And it kind of fails before that. And it is one of those cases where it's like, that actually is a scene where she's fighting them. It does absolutely feel like it's in a Luc Besson movie. Just not this one, if that makes sense. So that whole thing's kind of unfortunate. And like I was saying, the way they add a lot, this one's like 20 minutes longer, and like I said, really just not near as strong in that department, but, yeah, that's not to say that there's still a lot of that great stuff that was in the first one here. There's still them jumping off of stuff and, like, landing on their feet, and just really great, magnificent stunt work that we came here for. There's just a little more bogging it down than the really nice, clean-cut first movie, so there's that. There's also, and you can kind of tell that this one's not as, like, there's more kind of distracting from the action than there was in the first movie. Like, you kind of get that sense immediately just looking at the rating by itself. Because this one says it's rated R for strong violence, and Ultimatum says rated R for some violence. So it's like just right there you can tell that, and it's not like it. Like I said, we're talking about like a non-combative thing here in parkour and all that. So it's like you don't necessarily need violence for the movies to be awesome, but you can still get a sense that Ultimatum just really feels like kind of we're getting a bit of a watered-down version, despite the fact that it's doing everything it can to be bigger. But it's really just not quite reaching that. But as I said, that's not to say there isn't some quality stuff in the movie, because there certainly is. It's just kind of all in the action scenes, and like I said, they don't quite get as much of the focus as they probably should, certainly not as much as they do in the first movie, which, like I said, felt completely and totally non-stop, so... But either way, if you're, like, watching them back-to-back or whatever, still, it's basically, like... It's just, like, the movies take a shot of adrenaline, and then somebody says, go, and then it just... and then you just get exactly that, so... Yeah, but obviously, as you can probably tell... the first movie, all day, every day, if I had to choose. But they do make kind of a nice double feature along with each other. It's sort of like when you see, like, the Grindhouse double features. Now it's like there's usually one that's, like, really crazy and out there, and then there's another one that's a bit more downplayed, but still has a bit of that craziness in it. Yeah, it kind of feels like a double feature kind of like that. So, I can certainly appreciate that. So... Yes, that's what we have here. Next week, I'm going to do Gus Van Sant's Death Trilogy, I think. Also, in a couple of weeks, I think I'm going to do the Hal Hartley Trilogy, the Henry Fool Trilogy. So we'll have that kind of as a companion piece to the Gus Van Sant video and all that. And, yeah, and another one in between those that I already know as well. So yeah, all those are planned for the rest of the month. And then we got some suggestions earlier, so I'll probably look into those starting in July. So... we'll see where all that goes. So until then, I think we're done.